Hello and welcome to the Santee Church of Christ Bible Study Review, where we just go over the last lesson that we reviewed the previous Sunday. So if you missed it, you can catch up, or if you're following in these brief synopsis scenario, you can just kind of catch up on the class and get an overview of the class. So we are in Deuteronomy. We're in Deuteronomy 24. If you have any concerns about what the book is about, you can go find that on YouTube or Facebook. So we are in chapter 24, in the second part of chapter 24, which covers various laws. And there was a lot of discussion that I won't cover here. We're just going to encapsulate what we saw and what we talked about briefly. So if you remember last week, we talked about the law that prevents a woman who is divorced and remarried to go back to her former husband. And then following that up was the law where a husband is ordered to not work or go to war for a year and is to make his wife happy. Most specifically because the marriages are, in that culture, arranged, and it's not necessarily somebody that you know really well or anything like that. So it's up to the husband to make sure that that marriage works, as well as the wife, but God commands the husband in that way. So following up with those laws, and I'm just going to briefly go over them very quickly, and then what we extrapolated from these laws. No one shall take a pledge of the lower and upper millstone, for he is taking a man's life to pledge. So if you're going to borrow something from somebody and you have to give them something as collateral, you were not to give them your livelihood. That's what was behind that. If a man is found stealing a person of his brothers, of the sons of Israel, and deal with him as a slave and sells him, that thief shall die. So God is prohibiting enslavement against somebody's will. In other words, kidnapping among the brotherhood. Now, slavery was part of the culture. That's how the world worked back then. So there was enslavement as far as when it came to war. That was a different matter altogether. That was allowed. Be on guard for the plague of leprosy, that you watch closely and do all that the priests tell you to do. So he's just telling them, beware of it. And remember Miriam, and he talks about when God struck Miriam with leprosy. Again, here we go in verse 10. When you lend to your neighbor of any kind, you shall not go to his house to get his pledge. You shall stand outside. If the man is poor, you shall not sleep with his pledge, like if it was a piece of clothing or something. You shall certainly give back the pledge to him when the sun goes down. So this is something, again, about when you're lending to a neighbor or a friend or something like that. You shall not oppress a poor and needy hired servant of your brothers or aliens in the land. You shall give him his hire. Do not let the sun go down on it, for he is poor and has lifted up his heart on it. In other words, when he's done for the day, you pay him. So God is looking out for the people who are poor and who have less opportunity. The fathers shall not die for the sons, and the sons shall not die for the fathers. They shall each die for their own sin. In other words, if you're executing justice against somebody and it calls for their death, you don't go in a mob and go chase after the father or the son and say, well, we don't like you too, and we're going to kill you as well. That's prohibited. So you shall not pervert the judgment of an alien. So if somebody is a foreigner in their midst, they were not to pervert justice on them just because they were from another country. Interesting, yes. Similar with orphans, or you shall not take a widow's garment as a pledge, protecting those, again, who are less fortunate and have less opportunity. You shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and Jehovah your God redeemed you from there. So he's telling them, you need to remember where you came from. Just because now you're going to have stuff doesn't make you better than anybody. So he's putting a caveat on those in power who have power over others to execute that power with great care and justice, and with regard to everybody else and their position. When you cut down your harvest in your field and have forgotten a sheaf, you shall not turn back to take it. It will be for the alien or the orphan and the widow. When you beat your olive tree, which is how they harvested, you shall not search the branch behind you. It shall be for the alien, for the orphan, and for the widow. When you gather grapes in your vineyard, similar to that. Don't turn around and grab things that fall on the ground. Leave it. You shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and on account of this I am commanding you to do this thing. So God is protecting the orphan and the widow and the alien who will not have the same opportunities as a landowner who has power. So these are power dynamics that God is addressing. These are contingency laws for people to not. It's not about not harvesting. It's about taking care of the people in your community. And even more importantly, trust God that He will supply what you need, even though you're letting this stuff go. That's the higher calling that God is calling these people to. Okay, so we see God is addressing purity, intent, family, neighbors, being friendly. He's exacting laws against forced slavery. He's addressing health and purity. He's asking his people to be courteous and polite and respect one another, especially those in power. He's telling them, you need to respect people who don't have the same sort of power structure that you have because you own property. He's also addressing justice and mercy. And he's telling them to remember that they are a people of humility. They were slaves themselves at one point. He's telling them they need to have mercy, compassion, and to be generous. And we really expounded quite a bit on all of those points. And these are all categorized to help the individual, the family, the community, the region, and then the nation as a whole. And this is how God is addressing them. It starts off with the individual who becomes the person who trusts in God. And when they are all doing that, then the nation itself will be a godly nation. Okay, so that was it. That was a study that finished off chapter 24. Tomorrow, which is Sunday, we will be in chapter 25. And that is the final chapter where we see these sort of contingency laws being dispensed, and then we start getting into these blessings and curses that they are to acknowledge. We welcome you to come. If you have any questions, you can note us from any one of our online presence, either YouTube or Facebook or our website. Thank you for listening. Hope to see you, and may God bless you.